Boris Johnson will take revenge on everyone who blocked him, the legal system, Remainers, human rights and the BBC. And the leader in the Daily Telegraph says the subject of the BBC was introduced very late in the day in this election campaign, but there are legitimate questions to be asked over its future. Finally, Hugo Rifkin in The Times worries that there is no escape from the dodgy election advert blitz, as thousands of misleading campaign messages are aimed at voters on the internet in the final hours of the campaign. Joining me today to look through those are the former Special Advisor to Amber Rudd, Mo Hussein, and the writer and researcher, Maya Goodfellow. Welcome again to you both. Now, Maya Goodfellow, what did you make of Henry Deeds, the sketch writer in the Daily Mail? I mean, he's basically saying there is not the palpable enthusiasm for Jeremy Corbyn in the final days of this campaign that there was back in 2017.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting take if he's talking about the campaign being lacklustre. And actually, the activists I've talked to, thousands and thousands of people around the country getting out and campaigning for the Labour Party. Last night in Putney, I believe there was around 700 people came to this canvassing session. So there's so many people that they didn't know what to do with them. So this idea that there is absolutely no enthusiasm for the campaign, I think isn't borne out actually by the activists on the ground. And what I think we have seen over the past 4 years at least is a shift. There's been a re-engagement in politics, in part because of what's happened with the Labour Party and a lot of activists joining the Labour Party, engaging, getting out, door knocking and being very excited about this plan that they have in terms of the economy. And something that he says is that this is freebie and all these giveaways. Actually, there's a lot of talk about how Labour's plans are really radical. It would really just bring us in line with a lot of Western European economies. So this idea of investment, it would actually take us to below the levels of investment in countries like Finland. What we've had here in the UK is chronic underfunding and lack of investment. Labour would really just shift the balance so we would be more in line with a lot of countries in Europe. So to suggest it's radical really misreads what's happening.
Is that so? It's not radical, it's just making us Western European?
I don't agree. I think it is quite radical, and I think also this kind of reference to Santa Jezza is quite enlightening, because the whole retail offer, and Labour do have a big retail offer, but I think there are questions that people are asking around the affordability of it, around is it even deliverable in a 5-year parliament, particularly if Corbyn becomes a leader supported by other parties? What would be their price for supporting him? So I think these questions, people have heard this before and are asking the right questions.
I mean, Maya's basic point, though, that this is just making us like Scandinavia or France if Labour's economic policies are implemented. Do you accept that?
No, I think different elements of it. So, for example, the broadband element, yes, I think South Korea do have something similar. So different elements of it may well do. But the overall picture around taxes, corporation tax, the impact on investment, but the elephant in the room, Brexit, the one thing the Labour Party do not want to talk about. So you can try and showcase everything else, but the Brexit issue is still very important and will be at the forefront of many people who are making business decisions and investment decisions.
Yeah, I mean, the Labour Party have talked about Brexit. I think this is what the Conservatives often want to do, is pivot towards Brexit. What we saw yesterday was Boris Johnson being confronted with this picture of a boy lying on the floor in a hospital being treated because there weren't enough beds. What Boris Johnson wanted to do was pivot to Brexit. He didn't want to talk about that picture. And the reason he didn't want to talk about that picture is because he wanted to distance himself from the past 9 years of Conservative government. But he has been around the table when some of those decisions have been made that have meant, massive cuts in our NHS. So 17,000 beds have been lost in our NHS, A&E waiting times an all-time high. Boris Johnson doesn't want to engage with that picture, not only because he is, there's a lot of mistruths in this campaign, he has contempt for a lot of the public, and his father has shown that contempt for the public, but because he wants to distance himself, right, from the Conservatives over the past 9 years. But he's been involved in so much of that. And so this is a politician who has overseen the ripping up of a lot of parts of our NHS. And so I think the public needs to see that. They need to recognise that there's a bigger context of what's happened over the past 9 years.
Well, talking about the picture, I do think the Prime Minister was quite slow in his response. He finally said the right thing, but putting the phone in his pocket was not the right thing to do, not the right look. But I would say I think the mother of this child has also said this should not be used as a political football. I think Jeremy Corbyn holding up this picture to a political rally, the Shadow Health Secretary tweeting it, is very much using it as a political football. And I think any politician trying to promise that nothing will ever go wrong in a system as big as the NHS is a very bold and risky thing to do. I mean, Labour have been in government in Wales, and look at the Wales A&E targets, which have not been met for years. So I don't think that this should be used in that context.
But it's not. I don't think it's about saying that nothing's ever going to go wrong in the NHS, of course.
But I mean, you sort of can't win, can you? I mean, you're Prime Minister, you're shown a picture. I mean, there is bound to be something going wrong in one of the thousands of hospitals in this country at any point. And
right, but I think this is not just about the picture, right? It's about his response to it. He wanted to distance himself from what has happened over the past 9 years. And we have to look at the trend. The worst A&E waiting times on record since those records began. But also there's a report in The Guardian today that suggests almost 5,500 patients have died because they've been waiting in trolleys in NHS hospitals. So it's not about saying, this is one picture, one case, and we're blowing this up and suggesting that this is inaccurately suggesting that this is not representative of something bigger.
In hospitals, were they,
sure, but this is
because they were on trolleys. Are you saying?
Yeah, but this is what this report in The Guardian says, and what we've also seen. I think we should also listen to a lot of those NHS staff who don't usually come out and make videos, stand on underground trains saying we are worried about the future of the NHS. It's unprecedented to see so many people, I think, coming out who work in the NHS and saying we are worried about the Conservatives winning again.
The NHS certainly is an Achilles heel for the Conservative campaign, and I think that's why the Prime Minister should have been quicker to actually take the example that he was given yesterday and then talk about the more investment that he's putting in, or the fact that that very hospital will be upgraded. That has always been kind of Labour's biggest card, that and this kind of allegation of the US trade talks and the NHS being for sale. But again, I do have to go back to this is because Labour do not want to talk about the key issue facing the country, which is Brexit, because their policy is confused, where the leader will remain neutral in any future decision. And by the time you get the flowchart out and explain the order of Labour's policy, I think people on the door will have lost interest.
Now, what about the point that Rachel Sylvester makes, basically saying this election is an unpopularity contest, that neither leader or front bench have a great deal to offer, and that they're going to have a problem because they made promises that they're not going to be able to keep on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, I think only boiling this down to leaders, I think we know from the opinion polls where a lot of people think of particular political leaders. I think there's a general distrust of politicians as well, promising things and people worrying about not delivering. But to suggest that none of this is deliverable, I don't really think that this is accurate. We'd have to really wait and see what it looks like on Thursday night, right, when we have that exit poll and we get those results through in terms of what the makeup of Parliament would be.
The exit poll could be wrong, of course.
The exit poll could be wrong as it unfolds. But, to suggest we're in a country where so many children are living in poverty, there's underfunding of our schools, of our NHS, of our public services, to suggest investing in that is somehow undeliverable, I think is just inaccurate.
Do you think it's become an election about who's the least bad, not who's the better?
Yeah, I do. There's a line in there that talks about voting against something rather than voting for it. But I think this is also a part of the strategy. Like, people will, I'm sure, be holding their nose at this election and voting along those lines. And the whole kind of pitch from the Tory side is, if you want Brexit, vote Conservative this time. So you don't have to become a lifelong Tory to do this. And I think that is very much the strategy. But we also have to remember that this isn't really about the wedding. It's not about Thursday. It's about the marriage, what comes next. So people will be held to account for the things that they have been promising on either side. And time will tell whether things are indeed deliverable or not.
OK, thank you both very much indeed for joining me. This is